Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And today is the 28th day since Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, perpetrating a massacre of 1,400 mostly civilians and wounding over 4,800 others. Turning immediately to central Israel, where we're joined with TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about the last 24 hours?
So over the last 24 hours, the Israeli forces have advanced even more towards the core of Gaza City, encircling at least above ground the strongholds of Hamas. But the major focus of attention has pivoted between the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, and the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on his visit to Israel, where from he was going to Jordan. And apparently, right now, there is no escalation in the offing. What one can surmise from the Nasrallah speech is that he is not escalating the Hezbollah involvement in the Gaza war. More to follow, of course, from Yossi and others, Yossi Kuperwasser. And Blinken did not manage to get what President Biden publicly wished, and that is a pause in the Israeli counter-offensive, because the Israeli government is insisting that a condition for that pause would be a release of the hostages held by Hamas, and that the products supplied during this humanitarian pause will not include fuel, which is being used, abused, and misused by Hamas.
Indeed. Turning immediately to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. Thank you for joining us. What can you tell us on the latest from an operational perspective?
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I think we see in the south the determination, I would say, of the IDF to pursue and to achieve the goals of this war. And we have to remember that we designated the two main goals to this war. The first one was to strike the Hamas, to ruin his infrastructure capabilities, and basically this organization, we should see him out of the arena in the Gaza Strip, and then from the other side to bring back the hostages. So the IDF is very determined on those missions, and also in the last 24 hours we saw the ground maneuver enlarging from the one side, and we see some urban fights. We see already fights which are coming from the tunnels and other operational encounters that the IDF have with those terrorists, but it is there. And of course, the Israeli Air Force is continuously doing its two missions. From one hand, to strike Hamas targets, infrastructure, and then from the other hand, a close support to the ground forces. We continuously talk about the need of, or we're asking the local population to move to the south part of the Gaza Strip, where humanitarian conditions are there. We know that there were also was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United States just referred to it, but in general, this is something that is continuously happening. The IDF is striking the Hamas, not someone else over there. So this is in the south. The other thing that we see, of course, is all Iranians proxies are taking part of in this, but we should emphasize that we are under the war threshold with the Nasrallah speech and whatever he said. I think it is important to see and to watch what they are doing, not only what they are saying. And if we are looking on what they are doing, they are still trying to challenge Israel, but under the war threshold. They sent some rockets, some UAVs, some anti-tanks, but all of those are being encountered very successfully by the IDF, and of course lately also from the Red Sea, which they were trying to challenge us with some cruise missiles and missiles that were shot toward Israel, but all of those were intercepted, and also the IDF basically showed his multi-tier capability of missile defense, which is, I think, also very important. The international cooperation, mainly with the CENTCOM, is always there. We see the very tight cooperation between air forces, between the IDF and CENTCOM overall. And this is also something which is very important for the deterrence, but also operationally.
Indeed. Well, I'd like immediately to turn to Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kupilvassel, the former Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the Commander of the Israeli Intelligence Directorate Research and Assessment Division. Thank you for joining us, General. What can you tell us about the speech that we heard of Hassan Nasrallah just an hour ago? He had a lengthy speech, and I must say that he aligned himself with the Iranian approach of trying to distance himself from the October 7th massacre that occurred on the one hand, but on the other hand, he did note that Hezbollah is already partaking in this war.
Yes, Nasrallah tried to explain the wider implications of what's happening in Gaza and to make it clear that the decision of to go to war was a Palestinian decision, a Hamas decision, and that Iran and Hezbollah were not involved in that, but they support Hamas because they understand the importance of making sure that Israel doesn't manage to get its goals achieved. And that's why he put forward two other goals, supporting Hamas, making sure Hamas is not defeated, and making sure that the Palestinians in Gaza are victorious in this war. This is also an interest of the national interest of Lebanon itself, because otherwise the implications for Lebanon are going to be very difficult. And that's why this justifies the involvement of Hezbollah in the fighting, and he said that he's actually joined the war on October 8th, the day after the war started. So he's already in the war. He's going to do more than what he's done until now, but he managed already to force the Israelis to devote a considerable part of their military to face the threat from the north. And he, of course, praised also the threat from the south, from the Houthis in Yemen, and from the extreme groups in Iraq that operate under Iranian control that are challenging the Americans. He spent a lot of time speaking about the American role and how the United States is responsible for everything Israel is doing, and blaming Israel for all kinds of terrible crimes against the population of Gaza and so on and so forth. And he went as far as claiming that it was Israel who killed the civilians in the kibbutzim and the communities around Gaza, and not the Hamas. That was, in brief, what Nasrallah had to say. I think the most important thing is that he didn't commit himself to waging a full-out war against Israel from Lebanon at this point of time. The threat is still there, especially as we move forward. What's important in my mind on top of that is that while this is happening, the Israeli leadership and the Israeli military are determined to move forward in their efforts in the south, in Gaza, in order to defeat Hamas. And they understand that any time provided to Hamas right now, as in the context of a pause or a ceasefire or anything like that, is counterproductive. And that's why they make it clear to the Americans, who are affected by the international community unease with what's happening to the population in Gaza, civilian population in Gaza, and wants us to make all kinds of gestures that are very dangerous. We have to clarify to the Americans that this is not going to happen. And I think this was the core of the visit of Secretary Blinken here. And it seems that the Israeli leadership stood fast against the idea that it has to do all kinds of things in order to ease the pressure on the American administration in this respect. And it wasn't easy in my mind, but the message was delivered. And that's where we stand right now. The pressure on Hamas is building up. The troops in Gaza are moving forward. It's a difficult war. It's not an easy one. We have casualties, but we were expecting that. There's nothing surprising in that. But we keep moving forward. We put pressure on the leadership of Hamas. We managed to hit some of the local commanders. And it's working according to the plan, I would say, by and large. And that's the important thing. And Hezbollah's activities are not going to stop us from moving forward towards this goal, because we are ready to face any threat coming from the north as well.
Thank you, General. Of course, it's very important to highlight, and I think our American viewers will understand this, that you cannot change a word and then expect it to provide different results. So on the one hand, the Pentagon comes out and says a temporary ceasefire would serve Hamas, but a temporary pause would not. That just doesn't make sense. It's obviously trying to convince a certain group of individuals that some activities may be bringing or yielding different results with the same action. Einstein has already told us what the essence thereof is. Nonetheless, when we're looking at the Hassan Nasrallah speech, and I'd like to revert to that, you can hear that he's terrified by the fact that the Americans are involved, that the British are involved. He invoked, obviously, the United Kingdom several times also in his speech, as well as other actors. He is making this speech from an undisclosed bunker in Beirut, where he is obviously... He is indeed speaking, but these speeches continue for a very long time. But when we look at the big picture, many people are watching and waiting to see what Hezbollah may be doing, including this speech is being broadcast live in Syria, in Iran, in Yemen, in other places, and all are looking forward to a full-fledged confrontation with Israel with the intent of bringing that into fruition. Now, I'd like to also add retired Colonel Richard Kemp, who is the former field commander of UK forces in Afghanistan, as well as the head of the International Terrorism Team at the British Cabinet Office, or COBRA. Thank you for joining us, Colonel. What can you tell us about the complexities from an international perspective? Obviously, we see scores of Muslims and radical left organizations joining in London and other places throughout Europe, the United States, Australia, and elsewhere, and doing everything in their power to somewhat rattle Western civilization in the face of these atrocities that were committed on October 7th.
Yeah, I think we've seen a pretty strong support from most Western countries, European countries, the US, etc., since this atrocity occurred on the 7th of October. Pretty strong. Obviously, there have been exceptions, and we've seen, for example, France voting in favor of a UN motion which was against Israel in the General Assembly a while back. We've seen Germany acting, I think, with considerable strength against Hamas supporters in their country, and they've introduced a number of bans to try and prevent that. In the UK, we've seen mass protests on the streets each weekend since this conflict began. And those protests, and the same in the US and on university campuses, and these protests are aimed, of course, at two things, really. First of all, I think they're aimed to try and pressurize those Western governments who have been strong in their support for Israel, who've refused, for example, to call on Israel to have a ceasefire. That's the first priority, I think, of these groups, to try and pressurize political leaders into changing their stance. And in Britain, we've seen the leader of opposition, Keir Starmer, under immense pressure because he has stood with the government line of supporting Israel. Yet he presides over a party which is still dominated to a very large extent by the remainder of the Corbyn legacy, in which particularly the further left-wing members of the government, of the Labour Party, would like to see Corbyn, I beg your pardon, would like to see Starmer call on Israel to ceasefire and condemn what Israel's doing. But so far, Starmer has stood pretty strong. The other target of the protests, the demonstrations, is the Jewish diaspora. And the BDS movement, the PSC movement, the other different pro-Hamas, anti-Israel movements in Europe and the US and other places, what they want to do, that one of their primary objectives is to undermine, or is to intimidate the Jewish people, particularly students, because they know that Jewish people in the diaspora are the most important supporters of Israel in different countries, and they want to intimidate them and get them to turn on Israel. That's been very successful over the years, and it's being successful now. It's really having a massive effect, I think, on so many, particularly Jewish students. And none of this comes out of the blue. This is the result. What we're seeing in our European and US and other countries, Australia is another example, is the product of decades of anti-Israel propaganda, which has been flourishing, developing around these countries, condemning Israel, branding Israel an illegitimate state, illegal occupation, illegal settlements, apartheid, all of these things. These messages have got through and taken hold. No matter what people, and I know many people have tried to counter it, it simply has not worked. It's a very, very strong influence, particularly among the younger people. And as a result of that, whatever happens to Israel, no matter how horrified you are by seeing the atrocities that occurred on the 7th of October, Israel had it coming. That's a pretty widely held perspective. And now, of course, Israel is carrying out war crimes against civilians in Gaza. Now, I know, and you know, that's obviously complete lies, but this is the narrative that is being pumped out. And it's taking hold, and it's gaining strength, and I think it will continue to gain strength and power. It's supported by the media, not all the media, not TV7, of course, but it's supported by organizations like the BBC and Sky News in the UK and others in different countries who are happy to trot out Hamas statistics for civilian deaths without question, without any qualification. And of course, that sort of thing, and casting real aspersions on the actions of the IDF. All of this feeds the fire, it feeds the flames, and it not only encourages the protesters, it also, of course, serves to encourage Hamas to keep fighting. Even if there was any prospect of them not doing so, it would certainly encourage them to do that. And just one example of the kind of protest we've been seeing, or are going to see perhaps, on the 11th of November, that in Britain is Armistice Day. It's the day we remember the war dead from the First World War. And the 12th of September this year is Remembrance Day, in which we remember the dead from all wars. These are very solemn days in the British calendar, probably among the most solemn. And there's an intention to carry out protests in London, certainly, and other cities as well, in the UK, on the 11th of November, which are likely to disrupt those solemn events. And I know that this is in the mind of the police, and the authorities there are looking at trying to do what they can to ban these marches. But again, that really does, it shows, I think it's an illustration in a way of the fact that this obviously is Israel's war, but it's also a war against all of us. The protesters, they're not protesting only against Israel, they're also protesting about Western values and Western way of life.
The sinister reality that you just mentioned, the latter one, to realize that on the day that the United Kingdom commemorates the bravery of those who made the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of liberty of the United Kingdom, is being defamed by those people who would see Britain and other countries obviously change form into a reality that does not celebrate those liberties that were so fought. And let's turn immediately also to Mr. Olin. Emil, obviously we do not have very much time left, but give us a little bit of a perspective of where are the things currently heading in the broad scope of things.
Let me mention first the massive turnout in the funeral of one of our fallen heroes, Lieutenant Colonel Salman Khabaka, a brave Druze officer who fell in the northern part of Gaza when leading his armor battalion. And there was an outpouring of grief and sympathy by thousands of Israelis when he was laid to rest earlier today. Now, going back for a second to the Nasrallah speech, we all remember that President Biden, immediately after this war started, said, "Don't," referring to Iran and Hezbollah and the other perpetrators. What Nasrallah is saying today is, okay, I won't. You say don't, I won't. It's not my war. It's separate from the so-called Axis file. It's a Palestinian conflict. I wasn't in on the planning, and rightly so, because this is how the Hamas leaders kept their secrecy. It's fine with me, but it's not my war. And I will do my part whenever I want to. So it's a success of American deterrence that we see unfolding. Now, tactically, Blinken did not get what he wanted, an Israeli announcement of a pause. But what he actually did achieve was a couple of days in which the IDF can progress throughout the weekend. It's a very slow news cycle in the United States, but come Sunday night or Monday morning, we will see more developments.
Indeed. General Gavish, you have roughly 1.5 minutes.
Okay, so Jonathan, maybe I would like to highlight something that we don't talk about it too much here, but it is super important, and this is the support the IDF, the people that suffered so much in the south part of Israel have from the Israelis, from the population in Israel, and I think that this support is super important for the resilience of Israel. And there were all kinds of questions about how united we are and so on. And I think that what we see, you know, I'm familiar with a group of young adults, and most of them high tech, working in the high tech industry, TLI community. And you see some of them are in reserve, but the other ones are doing whatever they can in order to support the soldiers, to support those families, and you see so many associations, private people, and I think this is really something that is super important for the resilience of Israel, and for us showing to ourselves, but also to the world, that we are united, and when there is a goal and we are threatened as a nation, we are there, and this is very important.
General Kupelwasser, other than the cowardice display of Hassan Nasrallah, can we expect Iran to enter into the fold at some point?
I think the Iranians made it clear that they are not going to be involved directly, but they support all those tentacles that they have when they take Israel militarily, and the Americans in Iraq. And that's the way they operate. If Nasrallah was careful not to do anything that would ignite an American response, the Iranians are not less careful on that issue. But I think that what's important is that what Nasrallah portrayed was the camp against camp. I don't refer to Richard Camp. The camp against camp nature of this conflict and war, actually. It's the Israel and the civilized world led by the United States against Iran, Hezbollah, and the other proxies of Iran, and especially Hamas, fighting each other. He understood and he made it clear that if Hamas loses, the entire axis is going to lose. And the entire axis is going to be in danger. And that's very important, and I think it has to clarify to the United States the importance of making sure that the camp led by the United States is going to have the upper hand, and the sooner the better.
Blinken referred to it too, so you are on the same wavelength.
Indeed. Colonel Kemp, you have roughly 1 minute and 20 seconds.
I'll just make one point, which I probably, as a non-Israeli, I probably shouldn't be so thin-skinned. But when I hear Secretary of State Blinken making a speech today in Israel, and we've heard the same stuff from Prime Minister Sunak and other world leaders, the UN, and numerous other dignitaries from around the world, calling on Israel to observe the laws of armed conflict, to try and limit the deaths to innocent civilians. I personally find that actually an insult to Israel when people do that, because I know, and I know that most American military people and British military people and others know how much effort the IDF put into observing the laws of war, protecting innocent civilians. And it's not necessary to come here and say that sort of thing. Of course, it's for a political audience, but nevertheless, it is insulting. And we shouldn't forget that I think it was after the 2014 conflict, the US chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sent a group of American officers over here to learn from the Israelis how to protect civilian populations on the battlefield. So it may be a minor point, but I think it's also an important point that it's very wrong, despite how strong you are standing up for your allies, to also at the same time give them a backhanded insult like that.
Absolutely. It's something we all agree in this panel, at least, and I'm sure in Israel. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Mr. Oren, General Gavish, General Cooperwasser, and Colonel Kemp for taking out of your times to update us on the latest. I'd like to thank all of you at home. And one point that I would like to make also beyond what was mentioned here today is that we know that the silent majority stands with Israel. But don't remain silent for too long, because we need your voice. Talk to your representative, talk to your district leaders, your national leaders, and make sure that they know that Israel has your voice. And the moment we all join together and do so, this will make a huge difference for all of us. So I really encourage you to do that. Beyond that, today we will have TV7 Israel News Bulletin, our daily news bulletin at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time. Until then, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.